So before you get into wrestling,
Kenny, what is it?
Before you get into wrestling, you were in fitness, but then you started making appearances on Canadian television.
I did, yes.
Talk about those appearances and how that kind of, in some ways, put you on the map of getting into pro wrestling.
Well, so yeah, I was becoming, they were calling me fitness expert and things like that because I was on the cover of fitness magazines. That was the industry I was in. But there was a very important show that I was on. It was called Off the Record.
Michael Landsberg.
And they really, it was a sports show, basically sports celebrities, guests, whatever, came on and talked about current events in sports. And I was a popular guest because not many women kind of knew sports and could speak well on them. But I could. And then they also knew that there was like, they tapped into a little, niche where they're like, oh, when we have wrestlers, we get really good ratings. So they would have wrestlers on and they would talk wrestling stuff, but also they just were featured guests and also amongst like maybe baseball players or whatever, but they got good ratings. And so I was always, called in to either be on the panel as well. And then even they just knew I was a wrestling fan as well. So they would call me and be like, do you want to, who's on from wrestling? Do you want to, so I'd be on those panels. But that really was part of like in the beginnings of everything where people started to see me. The visibility of Trish Stratus was starting to be known. And then the big show was, there was a live press conference in front of the Sky Dome. And Raw was being announced as a primetime show now because we used to, just like you guys, I know you guys watch it like a crazy hours. So us in Canada, I can relate, all those 25 years ago, we used to stay up late to watch it as well. But they were announcing that Raw would be prime time and the new broadcaster, blah, blah, blah. But it was a live press conference. And so Off the Record was being held in front there. And I was on that panel. And it was in front of the wrestling crowd who was then going to Raw that evening. And I'll never forget because there was moments where they were asking questions and they were like chanting my name. And there's a moment where I look so silly, but I'm just... So they go like, who's the hottest woman in wrestling? That was the question, right? So I'm like, and then the crowd's like, you are! And I'm so tickled by that. I'm like, oh my God, they're talking about me. Like, it's so, watching it back, and I get flustered in my answer and everything. I'm like, this is Sable, I don't know. But that like moment, like on that show, I believe was like a big turning point for people's like starting to buzz about me, because then I went to the show that night and then people started being like, oh, when are you going to start wrestling? I heard you started wrestling. Suddenly I was on these wrestling boards that were like, rumored Trish Stratus, the fitness models coming to wrestling. And then somehow it all came true though.
And Jim Ross was the guy who signed you.
Yes.
What was that conversation like? You being someone who wasn't a sort of fully trained wrestler yet. What was that conversation like of him bringing you in?
It went really well. So I got lucky in a way, I guess you can call it lucky. At the time I didn't think I was lucky. I thought, what the hell's going on? So I met Michael Hayes, and he was the first person, and you were talking about all these Canadian shows. Slam Jams is like a Canadian segue to like talk to the Canadian audiences. They plug it into the Canadian programming to tell about the events and things like that are relevant. And so they were filming. I was on a show on like one of my covers. I was on a talk show about my covers, and they were filming the Slam Jams in the next studio. They're like, oh, they're doing the wrestling thing. Do you want to go see it? And I was like, oh my God, yes. I go back there. Michael Hayes is like, oh, you're Trish Stratus, the fitness model. And I was like, oh my God. And he goes, you should send your stuff in, And I was like, what? Okay. I mean, I didn't think of that. So I went home, made my prep. Like when I do this, it means I went on my computer, I put on my press kit. I like a little nerd, right? I put on my thing together, sent it off to them, and I waited. And I waited, and no one wrote. And I was a little discouraged, but I was like, oh, okay, but hold on. Let's see. If they do call, let me prepare the best possible package. And so during that time, I found out where Edge trained. And I started wrestling. So I started wrestling, and luckily for me, turns out that little blip was, in WCW all jump ship. They went, our WWF guys jump ship to WCW. So during that time, Terry Taylor, that was led by Terry Taylor, he originally had my package. The story goes that Terry Taylor took my little promotional kit, put on Jim Ross's desk and said, this is Trish Stratus. If you don't want her, we'll take her. So but because you already, she sent it here, so it's, we'll give you guys first dibs on it. And then, that's why there was that little lull. But like, luckily, because for me, I got to go train and really get armed with this, little foundation. So the point where when I sat down with Jim Ross, I remember one of the questions he said, it's a very physical business. And I said, yeah, well, I've been training for, the last couple months. And he was like, oh, and I think he was surprised to hear that, didn't know, because obviously I had no background in wrestling. And I think that really kind of sent, a little check mark on the interview. And a couple weeks later, I ended up being sent a contract.
And you debut as the manager of TNA, but one of the first big angles you were involved in was the Bubba Ray Dudley powerbomb spot. Yeah. And that's a very physical spot, and you were teasing him and all that kind of stuff. What was that like in that experience with Bubba, who I assume was probably not the most welcoming person to somebody new who wasn't a wrestler.
Why do you assume that?
I have watched interviews with him.
I see. Yeah, Bubba's a tough love kind of guy, I guess you could say. Yeah, I think he was just like, I think he was also willing to, like, you know, before he passes judgment, here maybe had already passed judgment, but he was willing to be like, a lot of the times in wrestling, it's like, let's give her the ball and see if they run with it. You know what I mean? And so he was like, she's got this chance. Let's see what she does with it. And I was like, you know, and Bubba would sometimes, when the women were, because there was a phase where he was powerbombing all sorts of women through the table, various tables, not the same one, because you know then it breaks. And then he would protect them. He would do a little bit. He would protect them a little bit. And I was like, I don't want you to protect me. I want to go through it just like, you know, like the guy would. And I want to really like make this look really good. And I think that went a long way for him, but not only for him, but for the, you know, fans watching, colleagues, my colleagues, knowing that I was willing to put my body on the line. I think that went pretty far. And it was like a good moment for me to be like, all right, I'm here to stay.
And obviously, one of the biggest angles you were involved with was the Vince McMahon affair, where it all leads to WrestleMania 17. Was that always a plan of this is going to be a long-term story that's going to culminate in something, or was that something that organically happened while the storyline was playing out?
I don't know if that actually was like, this is the point, we'll make it work towards, but we did know that there was a storyline that was ultimately, you know, being in the story where I was, I was a heel, and then I went into the two storylines I'd been in at that point had been a heel. And they knew they wanted to then integrate me more into other things and maybe see what this, you know, sort of like the fighting babyface could do. But we had to do some work to get there. So I think it was part of the plan was to do this work in order to get me to make this shift in character.
And obviously, you know, there's real life stuff, but I mean, in terms of the Trish Stratus character with Vince, I mean, that was a real pivotal moment, really, for the Trish character.
Yeah, it was because, you know, as a hated character, you know, you had no sympathy for you hate the character, but we had to go and do certain things, certain storylines and moments had to be created so that the fans, you know, we were basically evoking this emotion from them, like, we need you to be sympathetic, we need you to feel something for you, and they wanted, and the fans eventually did rally for Trish Stratus to be like, you know, like, oh, don't take this crap anymore, like, you know, and I think it's cool because it's something that people can relate to in real life. They've been maybe bullied or they've been, you know, shut down to the point where, like, sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. And I think that was the character work we were doing, was to try and create that moment. So, or, you know, and in an organic way where we, you know, we wanted you guys to organically feel that so when you watched it, we weren't telling you what to do, you were telling us what to do at that point, you know. And so, I think we did a really good job of like doing these little moments along the way so that you were like, no, damn it, Trish Stratus, stand up for yourself. You deserve better. And, you know, and then finally, you know, the big moment came, WrestleMania, the grandest stage of all, where I got to stand up for myself and say, I'm not taking this no more, and I'm not taking this no more, and I'm gonna move on. And, you know, and then the next phase of Trish Stratus was born. And
one thing that will surprise people is that the barking like a dog segment is something that people are concerned to bring up to you because they don't know if they should. But you know, that was you've said that's a kind of important moment in getting the story where it needed to go.
Yeah, it was. Like, people really, they're like, something we're gonna talk about is the barking like a. I'm like, it's fine, it's fine. I mean, I didn't realize how it should have negatively affected people. That's what we were trying to do. That's good reaction, you know. But it did make you be like, oh, I don't want to see her in this situation anymore. So, like, come on, Trish Stratus, get out of that situation, you know. So yeah, but I was so hated. We had to be like, how do you make them turn? How do you make them care about me and like get behind me and rally for me? So, you know, sort of putting me to my lowest is a way to, like, then they were part of me building up as a character, building the strength, building up the courage, so to speak, to like take the next step.
Was there a moment for you when, because obviously you were a pivotal part of women getting more time on TV, getting more matches with Jazz, Victoria, Molly Holly, the list goes on. Was there a moment for you where you thought, we've done it, like we've got somewhere from all the fighting that you guys were doing?
Yeah, it was, there's not one particular moment. There's a phase where, like, we'd see it in, like, the amount of females coming to the shows, we would see it at autograph signings. It was all of a sudden like it was purely men for a long time. But then you started to see females coming, and so I know as a female growing up as a fan of wrestling, there wasn't much of it. There wasn't many of us, And so when you found another female, you're like, oh, you like wrestling too? Cool, But you were kind of a tomboy. You were kind of part of the boys. You weren't really, there wasn't many girls watching wrestling or into wrestling. So to know that we were starting to get women interested, and to like, the guy would bring his girlfriend now because she's like, oh, I like what the girls are doing. I like to see what they're doing. That we're offering something for them as well. So we definitely we felt there was a bit of a shift in the demographic, and that was really cool to know that, like, oh, okay, we're kind of making a difference here, people, and maybe I can say, not that there was one particular match where it shifted, but when the we want puppies chants stopped, there was a point where they just stopped, and that's because they weren't only looking at that anymore, they were looking at our work, and so that was really cool for us to get there.
One of your biggest moments was slapping the taste out of Chris Jericho's mouth at WrestleMania 20, yeah. But that wasn't planned, which people would be probably quite surprised to know.
Yeah, no, it was, that was literally made on the day of, and we say that in wrestling, things change on the dime, and there's moments we have to pivot, sometimes it's depending on the crowd, sometimes it depends on your boss. That night, depending on our boss. We had been working the storyline, and again, it's one of those things in wrestling, I like the idea of, as a character, working towards a moment and knowing that we're gonna have these character moments and story arcs that lead us to something. And so we were working towards Chris Jericho and Trish Stratus coming together, and then we were excited as performers. We were gonna have this moment where we were gonna present this female and male duo that really hadn't been done before, right? It was sort of like the woman was always the valet, so we were gonna be equals, and we were gonna be even like in a tag team duo, the way the duo would sort of present themselves. We wouldn't be fighting, obviously, because they weren't doing the mixed thing, but to have two characters out there like talking together I think it would have been really fun. Still to this day, I think it would have been cool. So the night was supposed to come where, the chase has been happening, and fans have, you remember, fans organically have changed Chris Jericho into a babyface. And to me, I think that's a big thing where, like, they're so into it and they want it so quickly. And I say we pivot due to the fans. Trish was a babyface, Chris Jericho's a heel, but they want this union so badly that they organically change and start to cheer for him. And it's almost like the cheer, look, we're cheering, he's a good guy. Like, they're trying to convince Trish Stratus to go for this guy, And then, so the moment was going to be WrestleMania, and they would finally come together. And so Vince was like, okay, let's just talk about the segment. I'm just going to talk to you guys. And then he was like, literally like, so tonight you're going to leave with him. And I'm like, which one? Him? You mean? No, him. It was like, oh, he was definitely not talking to Chris about Chris right now. He was talking about Christian. I was like, oh, wait, no. And at first we were all like, because we had worked our storyline towards that moment. We're like, we did foreshadowing last week. People will know. No, they were fine. And also I'd been a babyface, a beloved babyface for so long too. I was just like, I don't know, am I ready for this? Are the fans ready for this? But they were. And then we shifted that night, and it worked out perfectly. It was a really cool moment, an iconic moment, a WrestleMania moment that people still talk about. So to be part of those moments where, people feel it so deeply and still talk about it, years later, it's cool.
And when you became heel Trish and you really got into that role, how important do you think it was for Lita to be the person on the other side for you to bounce off of to kind of make that character work?
Yeah, no, for sure. Because we were revisiting the rivalry from the very beginning. No matter what, like, Trish and Lita were like, there was always, whenever they get in the ring, there's something, there's something between us. And so for us to then bounce off each other and then have that play off each other was really great. People loved it.
I mean, one thing, you had the feud with Christy Hemme in 2005. She was the Playboy cover girl. I assume they were hounding you for years to try and get you to do Playboy, but I guess for what you were doing in wrestling, it wouldn't have really worked because you were trying to have this kind of idea that the work is what is important, mm-hmm. and that's going to be different to being a Playboy cover girl, right?
Yeah, it just wasn't, honestly, it's just not my thing. This whole sexy thing is not really my thing, believe it or not. They asked me a number of times, and I declined a number of times. This whole sexy thing is not necessarily a natural thing to me. I'm very tomboy. It's kind of like, like I look back at some of my interviews and it's like, they were like, what's your favorite, list your lingerie, and I'd be like, I wear boxer shorts, bitches, and I wear a tank top. How about that? Sexy? You think that's sexy? But some people did. I just didn't subscribe to that, and it wasn't a natural thing. So, but to be honest, the sexy thing was hard enough for me to pull off. I did that, But to be naked is just like, I'm like, oh no, I'm good, thank you, you know. And at the end of the day, I am here to be a wrestler. I am here to, you know, I wanted to at that point, I remember saying I want to be the best female wrestler that's ever existed, and that certainly, you know, had nothing to do with being a wrestler. So it didn't make sense for me in my career path at all to do it.
You had a lot of long-term stories. The Mickie James one obviously is one of the most successful. Yeah. There's the WrestleMania match. Talk to me about the WrestleMania match and what it meant to you, and how important the build was to last for so long.
Oh gosh, because back then storylines were important, but they weren't. They maybe lasted maybe 2 pay-per-views long, but we were so lucky to have the storyline that just like went on, and it was. Oh, I think we've hashtag longest rivalry ever, but I think maybe me and Becky might have surpassed that. We probably did. So, but yeah, we were so lucky back then because we did have these cool things. We brought in other characters. We got to just really do some unique stuff. Ashley was part of our storyline, which was really cool to work with her. Yeah, we got a chance to really take the fans on a ride and really like develop and do the things we talk about, evoke an emotion from them, you know, flip them a little bit too. We flipped the crowd a number of times. And it was great. And then we, you know, ultimately we got to culminate to WrestleMania 22, where that was Mickie James' first time winning a championship. So to be a part of that historically is amazing. And I really feel like we went out there and had an amazing match. The fans, because they've been on this ride with us for so many months, they were so into that story and they were so into that match, and it felt so good to be out there. It was Chicago, right? So like that's a crowd, all right. And to know that they were so with us, and I mean, I would say we got one of the biggest reactions, most engagement from the fans from the night, and you know, we'll always have that. You know. Were
you surprised that the fans kind of turned on Trish that night a little bit?
Well, let's think about it. Mickie wants to engage in, what do we call it, HLA, and Trish doesn't. Who's the baby face? Who's the heel here? You know, they're like, Trish, you're denying us. We're not going to cheer you anymore. It's kind of what's happening. But it was also that organic time where they were ready for Mickie to, like, they wanted to almost, like, I feel like in the Io Skyway, right, where like when she got, they were so excited for her, like as a heel, she won the chance to become champion. But they were so, they were ready for her to have her moment, you know, and I felt like the same, which is great because we did our work to get you to the point where you want this character to have her moment. You know, it's pretty cool.
And you have your retirement match in 2006, Unforgiven, and it couldn't really be any more perfect. Lita, Toronto, pay-per-view, you get to, you know, win the belt and retire as champ. It's kind of the perfect scenario.
Yeah, like why would you ever go back and ruin that perfect scenario? Could you ever outdo such a perfect scenario? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
Were you at the time when you had that experience? Were you happy? Like, I think that's it. I've done everything I want to do.
Yeah, at the time I was definitely very confident in my decision. I felt very fulfilled in my career at that point, and had a good look at it. Like it wasn't like I was yanked out of it and it was like, oh, I didn't have that moment. Like I had the chance, luckily, to decide, am I going to sign or not sign? Listen, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and that was one of the deciding factors that I was like, the universe is telling me it's time to go. You know, I mean, I was already playing with the idea of like resigning or not, but my mom getting cancer and me knowing that if I was on the road in that schedule, I could not be with her for her treatment and that journey. And for me, yeah, it just, I looked at the roster, like look at the women we have that can work. Luckily, I've been blessed to have worked these great storylines and long storylines and really good, juicy storylines with Jazz and Victoria and Molly, and, you know, and have these things that, you know, people remember to this day, this rivalry that people remember. So I was like, I feel good. Like, I feel like I'm good. I was 30 years old, and I was ready. I was ready to move on.
You came back and made some sporadic appearances, but WWE did ask you to be part of the WrestleMania 25 Divas Battle Royal, and you declined. What was the pitch, and why did you decline?
What did you say it was?
What was the pitch?
What was it? It was the WrestleMania what?
WrestleMania 25,
and it was
when they did the Battle Royal.
Exactly. That's all I need to know. No, I'm just kidding.
You're not kidding.
I'm not kidding. The end. I always just said when I retired, if I go back, it's got to be for something important. Not important. That's not the right word. It's got to be for something that's good. No, that's not the word either. It's got to be just something that it has to check a few boxes. I want to work with someone I haven't worked before. I want it to be for myself, selfishly as a performer. I want a challenge for myself, but I also want to elevate another character or person. I want it to do, I want to do stuff that hasn't been done before. I want to present things a little bit differently. And I just thought that wasn't like to come back after being retired. I didn't think that was like a good platform to do. I didn't think it was necessary. I don't think you were like, oh, this would have been way better for Trish Stratus was in here, so.
I do want to very briefly mention something that's kind of overblown, which is the John Morrison snub from the night after WrestleMania 27. You're the Tough Enough trainer, you come back, you have this match, and he's kind of got an issue, I guess, with WWE really, that, a spot's being taken. Yeah. That's got to be a tough spot for you to be in. Pardon the pun, Tough Enough.
That's what you did there.
Because you're kind of in the middle almost of this situation, and it's not really.
I was in the middle. It was Snooki was on one side and he was on the other, and I got snuffed in the middle. It was. I mean, it did get blown up. I mean, people were like, "Oh, I remember that moment," and it was like headlines. It was like a big deal, but it wasn't cool. So it was deserving those headlines. But he just was like felt whatever he felt, which was like you're taking a spot from someone. Who knows who? I don't know who he was referring to. Somebody, anybody.
I can't think of it.
Right? But we did serve a purpose there. We were there because, and I was very clear with saying, let's be honest, I'm not taking anybody's spot. They gave me the spot because we have a show that's a television WWE property that is airing after WrestleMania. It's called Tough Enough. I'm on it. They're promoting it. That's their way. That's how they've chosen to promote it. That's all. I'm just here to work, man. But I said, well, what you've done ultimately, if you've taken away a moment from the fans, by just personally feeling like this, it doesn't matter what John thinks about Trish. It's John Morrison and Trish Stratus got to team up, and they were victorious at this, it was actually on Raw in the rematch the next night. And we were victorious, like, yeah, let's celebrate. And fans were excited about these two characters coming together. It's always neat when two characters that you would never think would cross paths do. And so he just took away that moment from the fans. So that's kind of dumb. Why would you do that? That's what we do. Our moments are for the fans, right? So, that was that. And I told them what's what, and we're totally fine now, by the way.
You came back and did the Royal Rumble in 2018, first Women's Royal Rumble, which is epic, and then you faced Charlotte. You proved you can still go with the current generation, but that wasn't enough. You wanted to come back and do
more, we need more.
What made you, after those things, still want to come back and do a proper, full-blown, run?
It wasn't that I wanted to. It just, the opportunity kind of presented itself, and like it's not that I get an itch or anything. I'm like, I need to go back. It's just that, I went back and did some live events that were in Toronto. I was hosting them, and Becky and I got the chance to do a few things, but then we engaged on like a Twitter war to like whatever, it's just a live event, but we're like, let's have some fun online. But people were really digging it, and suddenly you were hearing about, oh man, that would be a fantasy match. I was like, I've done tons of panels, and no one really ever said like, I'd love to see you face Becky Lynch. It just never really came up. I'd heard everyone from, of course, Sasha Banks was a big one, but like, various people, but and then people saw the appeal of that match and the generational face-off of each other, and that'd be pretty cool. And so I guess after that gave us a little taste, and we enjoyed working with each other. So we were like, that would be cool. Becky and I bonded when she became pregnant, and I did the like, hey mama, how you feeling? And then we just bonded over that, and then having the birth and being mommies and talking mommy stuff, and so then we got to the point where I remember thinking, so I'd been asked, would you go back here and there? And I kind of said, yeah, I'm kind of like, I feel like I've done the babyface comeback, like, yay, and, tail off Elias and move on. And it's fun for those novelty moments. They're fun. But, I don't want to wear out my welcome, first of all. And I said, if I go back, I'd like to surprise people, too, and do it a little different. And then I thought, as a performer, I would like to challenge myself and do something, do a heel run, because I hadn't touched that for so many years. I think it was 18 years or something. I think when I did that promo, it was like 18 years since I did a heel promo, So yeah, and I guess Becky was heel for the longest time, and then she, one of those organic changes again, but she got injured, came back organically. They changed her baby face, the crowd made her baby face because she was back, and she's the best. She really is. I was like, there's our moment. And she called me and said, do you want to come back and do a match with me at WrestleMania? And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, we could do this. And then we were like, how can we get to me turning heel? And then we brought in Lita. We thought it'd be cool if like me turning on Lita is like, you're more invested on me turning on my friend of 20 years than me and Becky had no television history at that point. So yeah, and then I was supposed to come in for a little bit after WrestleMania, turn heel, do a little something, and then suddenly I was in a storyline every single week for the next 6 months. We were not expecting that, but that's what happened.
During that time, obviously Triple H was in charge. You've worked under Vince on creative. You've worked under Triple H. What are the big differences? Because people don't really know yet because it's quite new. What have you noticed as the differences between them being at the helm of creative?
Helms. The
Helmsley.
The difference. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think as a mature talent, one that's been around for a long time, the creative process for me was quite the same. Like, it was sort of about pitching the ideas, speaking about what we thought, and I was able to execute sort of the timeline that I thought it would be great. I knew that I wanted to deliver, and we were all on the same page with things. With Vince, I was on the same page with Vince storyline wise, except for that he didn't want me to come back because he wanted me to be. He just thinks he was like babyface. They're never gonna boo you, and I'm like, yeah, they are. Yeah. So I think. The process sort of seemed the same. There was a little bit of the changing of the guard happen where you're like, wait, who do we talk to? That was a bit of a confusing time. But besides that, it's about how you handle your business, I guess, in a way. Like, you talk to your writers, you figure out the storyline, you actually find out the best way to execute it, and I found that it was pretty seamless for me.
Fans were obviously very up in arms about you guys not being on SummerSlam, which, was just because you didn't want to have a regular 8-minute match. You have this cage match.
Yes.
Match of the year contender. People were talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't really go any better. What do you take away from that experience?
Oh my gosh, it was everything. It meant so much to me because number one, it was the culmination of the storyline, and we felt like it needed that cage match. We were granted the cage match and granted the time to do it. And I just felt like no one got injured, and fans are super into it. It was so good. But for me, like, looking back, like, I was never able to do these things. So, like, me coming back and able to, like, check off some bucket list stuff it meant a lot. And obviously the cage match was something that you can pull interviews. I'm sure you've seen interviews from before. I'm like, I don't know, I'd like to go back and do a cage match, throwing it out there so, like, haphazardly. But turns out, hey, dreams do come true, kids.
People always ask you, would you ever go back and do anything else? You've had this kind of perfect heel run. In your brain, do you feel fulfilled that is it, or is there a part of your brain that still thinks there's something more to do?
I feel like I always feel fulfilled when I feel like I did what I wanted to do. We tied the bow, and it feels like it got a neat little bow, and it was a good little package. We did that, But I always say, it's like, it really is creative. It's creative and storyline dependent, and the product changes so rapidly, and it's so fluid. Like, you never know what could be the next storyline or what the proposed idea could be. So I always stay open, and I say, so there's if I say open because if it's something really cool, or like I can elevate someone, or like, I didn't expect Zoe Stark to be introduced. That wasn't part of our initial plan. When Hunter brought her on board, I was like, oh, I love it. And I was looking at him like, oh, I see the Batista Triple H vibes, that could be something down the line. And we're like, yeah, for sure. But I loved that I could work with someone one-on-one and, like, just give back a little bit of the stuff that I learned. And she was so good to, like, just take in everything, ask questions. I mean, she was like, from like outfits to like moves to like words. Like, I remember one time I was at the cottage, and she had a promo, and I stayed on the phone with her for 2 hours working on a promo, just to, I felt like a great responsibility, and I enjoyed that, working with her in that regard. And so I say, like, you never know what they'd propose. I'm always open-minded to, as long as it's fun, something interesting, elevating someone, all these little things. And ultimately, as long as I can give 100%, like, I'm never going to come back and be like, believe me, when I went back, I'm like, let me watch this. I don't want to give them like 60%, but like, here's a cool 60 for you guys. Enjoy. I know it's not quite the same as before. I couldn't do that. If I can go back and do at the top level, then I'll do it. But otherwise, I'm not. If I can't do it at 100%, I probably won't do it at all. But so far, it's been working out swimmingly.